LEGO is an absolute toy powerhouse, with over $10 billion in annual revenue and more than 1,000 new LEGO sets being released in 2025 alone. So it comes as no surprise that the company has their plastic hands in more than just toys, with 4 full-length movies, over 700 episodes of 12 different animated series, and 30 games released over the span of 20 years. The scale of their operations is truly impressive. But the LEGO games are the one thing that really stand out when looking at LEGO's brand, because, well, the early LEGO Star Wars games defined an entire generation of gamers. Whether we want to talk about these titles or any of the countless other LEGO gaming franchises, the game part of their business is huge, and a lot of these games are made by one company called Traveller's Tales. They had a solid start with a wide variety of extremely successful and critically acclaimed titles coming out every year from 2005 onwards. But today, Traveller's Tales and LEGO games as a whole are on the decline, and the spirit of the series is considered dead to many. So how did LEGO games have such a large fall from grace, and what was going on behind the scenes at Traveller's Tales that caused this to happen? This story is more interesting than you may think, so let's dive into it and talk about why LEGO games have all but died. And our story starts in the late 90s with the first true LEGO game ever made, LEGO Island, developed by a company called Mindscape. One of the ways that Mindscape came up with the idea for the game was by physically building LEGO Island's map out of Legos and getting kids to play with it. They observed what the kids did with this newly created brick sandbox and centered their development around creating similar elements for the game, which made LEGO Island feel like it came straight out of the imagination of a child. Mindscape kept in close contact with the newly established LEGO Interactive division, which focused on expanding the brand into other industries like video games. This helped the team to stay authentic to the brand and guided their decision about building a custom game engine for future LEGO sequels. Because, well, they were pretty optimistic that LEGO games would become something much bigger than this little experiment. LEGO Island released on September 26, 1997 for Windows computers. It was a 3D action-adventure game with open-world elements. You'd explore the island, which contained a variety of interactive activities, such as ambulance driving, jet ski racing, helicopter flying, and pizza delivery. It wasn't a great game. The graphics and performance were quite terrible, and the activities themselves were clunky and relatively uninteresting. But somehow, even with these flaws, the game had a lot of charm and felt very true to source with the brand image that LEGO had been giving off around this time. The game didn't really have a lot of customization and building like you would expect a LEGO game to have, and there honestly wasn't much room for creativity, but the characters on the island and the story kept it interesting enough to become the best-selling PC game for kids in 1997, selling over 300,000 copies and generating over $12 million in revenue for Mindscape. The game did well, primarily because of its engaging story that terrified young children around the world for generations to come. Basically, there's this guy called the Brickster who escaped from jail, and you had to stop him from single-handedly killing every man, woman, and child on the entire island by throwing donuts at cops to convince them to stop his chaotic escapades. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I had nightmares about this game as a kid, and if you've played it, you probably feel the same way. Anyways, the game was quite successful, and it was more or less released as a test to see if there was a market for LEGO video games, which, based on the sales, there obviously was. But there was one big issue. LEGO Interactive now had to find new developers to pick up from where Mindscape left off, because Mindscape fired the entire development team of this game without notice right when it came out. Why? Well, because they didn't want to pay them bonuses. As stated in an episode of the Bits and Bricks podcast by the senior producer of LEGO Island, Mindscape had massive performance-based bonuses set up for the development team if LEGO Island sold well. So when they saw that it was actually going to be a massive hit, they fired the entire dev team and sold the studio to the Learning Company for $150 million just a year later. This is by far one of the biggest corporate scumbag moments I've ever heard of in gaming, and it surprises me even today. But it would end up hurting Mindscape in the long run, because after this debacle, LEGO Interactive decided that they didn't want to work with this company for any future projects, and LEGO Island 2 would need to be given to a new company to pick up where Mindscape left off. Initially, the task was supposed to fall to Chrysalis Software. They developed 1998's LEGO Chess and 2000's LEGO Land, both for PC. These were very minor games that were more or less experiments by LEGO to see what worked. I won't spend a lot of time talking about them, but I will say that LEGOland was a criminally underrated game. It was basically a roller coaster tycoon style game, and I know that if I played this as a kid, I would have loved it. But I actually never heard about it until I researched this video. Anyways, following the release of these two games, Chrysalis Software began work on a game called LEGO Fantasy, which was supposed to be a tie-in with a TV show called Adventures in LEGO World. The thing is, the show was cancelled, and we only know about it because of a minute-long clip from the studio that animated it called Visionscape. The cancellation of the show prompted the team at Chrysalis to rework the game into the upcoming LEGO Island 2, and then, for unknown reasons, development of that game was eventually passed on to Silicon Dreams. LEGO Island 2, The Brickster's Revenge, finally released March of 2001, this time for more than just Windows. It also received a PlayStation, Game Boy Advance, and Game Boy Color port. And unfortunately, this game was not very well received, with user scores ranging from 55% for the PC version to 75% for the Game Boy Advanced version. While the original LEGO Island game was messy but charming, this one just felt forced and uninteresting. In the first game, the minigames contributed to the storyline of the Brickster and him committing genocide on LEGO Island, but in the second game, the minigames were thrown in randomly, and instead of a cohesive adventure, the game felt tacked together and generic. But not all was lost. LEGO Island 2 did improve the open world aspect and adopted a third-person perspective, something that became a staple with future LEGO games. Silicon Dreams tried again with another release the next year called Island Extreme Stunts. It released November 27, 2002 for the PS2, Game Boy Advance, and PC. The gameplay was pretty similar to its predecessor, with minigames taking place on movie sets as part of the story. It refined some of the issues, but was a relatively forgettable game. This one was even more linear than LEGO Island 2, and reception was pretty mediocre. It seemed like people preferred the open exploration of the first game, with a bit of the structure found in the second game and the increased action in the third game. If LEGO could find a way to combine the strengths of each of these titles with something new and exciting, it would inevitably have a lot of potential. They needed to transition away from the LEGO Island concept and go with something more grandiose. And to do this, they needed a new partner. But who could fit the bill? In 1991, a company called Traveller's Tales broke into the gaming market with a game called Leander. Like most first games, it wasn't exactly remarkable, but it served as an important first step for the studio. Rather than focusing on their own original IPs, Traveller's Tales went on to develop 1995's Toy Story for Disney Interactive. In 1996, they worked on Sonic 3D Blast and Sonic R for Sega. After that, they worked on 1998's infamous yet technically impressive PS1 title called Rascal. I think you're starting to see the picture. Traveller's Tales specialized in taking an existing brand and making a game out of it, generally some kind of 3D platformer. While their games kind of varied in quality, they usually brought some interesting ideas to the table. This trend continued into 2001, where they ended up as the first developers to try their hand at making the next Crash Bandicoot title with Wrath of Cortex. And it was mediocre. The game wasn't terrible, but it was obvious that Naughty Dog wasn't working on the series anymore. It felt like a lame rehash of the third game, with some of the additions feeling like a step backwards. They did come up with something more unique with Crash Twinsanity in 2004, but it also had mediocre reception. Traveller's Tales clearly had a lot of talent and potential, it just seemed like they'd never got enough time with one franchise to really understand it. What they needed was the opportunity to come up with a formula of their own. Normally, this is where I'd say that LEGO Interactive and Traveller's Tales joined forces, but it's a little more complicated than that. You see, after the failure of LEGO Island 2 and 3, the LEGO Group actually wanted out of the gaming industry altogether, so they ended up shutting down LEGO Interactive. The thing is, the head folks at LEGO Interactive didn't want to stop, so they created a new publishing company called Giant Interactive, which retained the exclusive rights to the LEGO brand in video games. This was the company that would publish 2005's LEGO Star Wars, which was developed by Traveller's Tales. As the game neared completion, they saw great potential in it and decided to purchase Giant Interactive to solidify Traveller's Tales, now called TT Games, as the exclusive developer for anything and everything LEGO. This turned out to be the best decision in the history of the studio. LEGO Star Wars the video game was the first in the iconic format. It released on March 29, 2005 for the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. Each of these games had a series of levels based off of the respective franchise, so in this case, the first 3 Star Wars films. You could play alone and switch between 2 different characters at will, or have a friend control the second player character. Enemies littered each level, so you had to defeat them with your lightsaber, gun, or other abilities depending on your character. There were also some puzzles to solve, collectibles to find, and a currency called studs to collect, which you could use to buy playable characters or cheats. Each character was pretty unique, and the sheer number of them made the game extremely replayable. The charming animations, LEGO assembling mechanic, and goofy cutscenes solidified this as a potential recurring series that appealed to pretty much all ages. Thanks to this, the game had sold 3.3 million units by March of 2006. And any kid growing up in the 2000s definitely played this game in co-op, so if you did, let me know in the comments because I know it was a huge part of my childhood. A sequel based off the original trilogy of films released the next year, and a complete edition the following year called LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga. If you played any of these, it was probably this game because, well, it sold an estimated 15 million copies to date. The Complete Saga included everything from the past two games and added some new content too, and people truly loved it. So of course, TT Games wasn't about to stop there. On June 3rd, 2008, they released LEGO Indiana Jones, and on September 23rd, they released LEGO Batman. These were notable for being the first LEGO games made for other franchises, and they took the parts that worked for the Star Wars games, but applied to other properties with a few twists. Both of these games sold extremely well too, with LEGO Indiana Jones selling an estimated 11 million copies to date, and LEGO Batman selling 12 million copies to date. And from here, the LEGO video game printing machine was turned on, and from 2008 to 2014, there were over 12 LEGO games released, including sequels to Batman, Star Wars, and Indiana Jones, alongside some new franchises like Harry Potter, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Lord of the Rings. While each brought new characters, levels, and gimmicks, they were all fundamentally the same game with different coats of paint. Sales figures for each of these games decreased consistently with every new release, and by 2013, the hype surrounding the LEGO game franchise has declined drastically. The notable exception was LEGO Marvel Superheroes, which released on October 22, 2013. It featured an enormous cast of 180 unlockable characters, each with a variety of abilities. Even though quite a few shared powers, they would have different abilities to compensate, ensuring that each felt unique. This paired extremely well with the open world map that you had to explore, which was a huge departure from the linear levels of past LEGO games. It felt like there was a genuine attempt to change up the formula, and it worked really well. For the first time in years, TT Games was trying something new, and LEGO Marvel Superheroes actually beat out the critic review scores for the original Star Wars games. It looked like TT Games had the potential to start a second golden age of LEGO games, and it was time for them to enter an era of experimentation. The next game they released was entirely different from the previous formula. It was called LEGO Dimensions, and it was a Toys to Life game that followed in the footsteps of the wildly successful Skylanders franchise that we covered in a past video, which will be linked in the description. LEGO Dimensions was a game that utilized physical LEGO minifigures, again, just like Skylanders. There were over 74 minifigures released between September of 2015 and October of 2017, and while the sales figures aren't public, the game undoubtedly made hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and helped to cement and also somehow kill the Toys to Life genre. There was also Skylanders, Disney Infinity, and Nintendo's Amiibo that played a part in this massive story, and we're currently working on a video about Disney Infinity right now, so if you'd like to see that, consider subscribing to the channel and joining the Discord in the description. Anyways, LEGO Dimensions was quite successful in its first few years, but the oversaturation of the Toys to Life genre and the insane cost to acquire all of the figurines caused TT Games to end support for the title in 2017. It was definitely a great project, but the sales figures and revenue were still far below the original LEGO Star Wars saga that skyrocketed TT Games into the spotlight. It had now been over 10 years without a massive hit game in the LEGO series, and the company had been declining for quite a while. They needed something big to bring them back to their former glory. And luckily for them, they had another project going on throughout the entire life of Dimensions that could be their next hit. This project was called LEGO Worlds, and it was aimed at being a full-on Minecraft competitor. The game launched into early access on June 1st, 2015 on Steam, and on paper, it was the perfect LEGO game. Think Minecraft, but using LEGO blocks and the LEGO brand. It took nearly all the strengths of Minecraft, added more detail and building options, pre-built creations, and enhanced exploration. Or at least, that was the idea. In reality, it fell short and had quite a few issues that kept it from becoming the next big LEGO game. So, what happened? Well, it started out strong. The strategy when launching LEGO Worlds into early access was to not market the game heavily, gather feedback with a smaller, dedicated community, and then work slowly towards a full release by building the player base, just like Minecraft. After the initial excitement from teasers and the early access launch, interest in LEGO Worlds quickly faded, even as updates were released. While the game initially received an 86% positive rating, this was more of a reflection of the potential that people saw in the concept rather than the quality of the product itself, a potential that ultimately went unrealized. The controls were messy on mouse and keyboard, the camera controls were even worse, and the game was incomplete even by early access standards, with people running out of content in 1 to 2 hours. If the other stuff worked, this could have been overlooked, but the building was cumbersome in a building game, and the combat was bland and unexciting. The people that liked the game at launch seemed to be either younger or hopeful for where updates would take it, instead of actually enjoying LEGO Worlds as it currently was. When LEGO Worlds left early access on March 7, 2017, its reviews dropped further, declining to a 73% rating on Steam. The sentiment that the game felt incomplete persisted, and with its official release, there was no longer an obligation for the developers to continue improving it. Despite its promising concept, LEGO Worlds ultimately failed to deliver a polished experience. This disappointment, combined with the closure of LEGO Dimensions and waning interest in traditional LEGO platformer games, led to a significant decline in fan sentiment towards Traveler's Tales, once celebrated for their work on LEGO titles. Now, LEGO Worlds did improve a bit. On May 5, 2017, the game updated to version 1.1 with the addition of a sandbox mode, basically their equivalent of Minecraft's creative mode. In October, they added new building tools and made the current ones easier to use, and then a few months later, they added some small winter content and a handful of unremarkable DLCs. Things were trending in the right direction, but then updates kind of just stopped for LEGO Worlds. On January 29th of 2018, a Steam news post ominously titled, "Is Everything Awesome?" came out. It read, and I quote, "Nothing else happened for the rest of the year, and things got even weirder when TT Games deleted their entire blog off of their own website. And that was it. Nothing else was ever heard from TT Games about this project ever again, and LEGO Worlds, which was supposed to be the biggest and most successful LEGO game ever made, was abandoned." They had a few other games going on in the background around that time that followed the standard TT Games format, but their age of experimentation and hope for a better future were now over. There's no one answer as to why LEGO Worlds was abruptly abandoned, but we can read between the lines. On January 20th, 2022, Polygon published an article delving into the awful work culture at TT Games over the past 15 years, especially over the last 5 spent working on 2022's LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. And oh man, was it rough. Over 30 employees talked to Polygon about the issues at TT Games, and all had to speak anonymously due to repercussions if public. Employees were so stressed from the massive workloads that they'd frequently break down outside of work, half-jokingly calling it PTTSD. TT Games employed the typical industry blackmail of, you don't have to do overtime, but if you don't meet these unreasonable goals, there will be problems, which forces overtime. In the industry, this is known as a crunch period, and in the case of TT Games, employees reported working 80 to 100-hour weeks. They constantly had to do this to be able to ship multiple games per year with strict deadlines. They met these goals by planning required crunch time periods ahead of time instead of using it as an emergency catch-up tool. The co-founder and creative director, John Burton, would literally yell at anyone who tried leaving work on time instead of doing overtime. When people inevitably got fed up and quit, department heads would physically follow them outside of the building to ask why they left and to question their loyalty. The quality assurance testers in particular were appalled at the horrible working conditions. They weren't allowed to access other floors to prevent leaks, which meant they couldn't go to HR about sensitive matters. It also prevented programmers from easily contacting them about bugs, which is literally QA's job. Women faced harassment at the company, they were bullied, received snide comments, and were paid 15% less for the same jobs that men did. Women also consistently received fewer promotions than men. This was all according to a UK wage gap report. Somehow, this got even worse in 2017 when the Skywalker Saga entered development. The dev team unanimously wanted to develop the game in Unreal Engine, but management didn't want to pay out for the licensing fees that it would take to use Unreal. So they insisted on developing this gargantuan game in a completely new game engine that the team had no experience with, called NTT. This engine frequently crashed, lacked features that the devs previously relied on, and occasionally failed to save hours worth of work. It was a bad choice for the game in every way, all to save a few bucks. This debacle led to multiple employees approaching the managing director, Tom Stone. Meetings were held, which resulted in slightly better contracts being drawn up for the employees, but yet again, many fundamental problems were not addressed. While this was all ongoing, staff were frequently reassigned to different projects, adding even more chaos, and sometimes taking resources away from where they were needed most. A new studio head was assigned in 2020, Michael Denny. This guy also decided to scrap TT Games' dedicated concept team that worked on non-LEGO ideas to follow in case the company lost its status as the sole LEGO developer. The team was refocused to exclusively work on LEGO titles, despite the LEGO group becoming increasingly interested in working with companies outside of TT Games. All of these aforementioned issues, plus the doubling down on being solely focused on LEGO games, caused TT Games to decline even further, and with the LEGO group already beginning to work with other developers on other projects like LEGO Universe, their fate was pretty much sealed. Many left the company because of all of these issues over the years, and there are currently some ongoing attempts to address the company's problems. But so much of it could have been avoided if upper management had just listened to begin with, and actually committed to change. And as expected, a month after the Polygon article came out, Video Game Chronicles broke the news that the LEGO Group ended the exclusivity deal with TT Games. It seems like the company was rapidly declining, but even with this bad news, nothing changed. Fanbyte released a follow-up which interviewed multiple employees at the company, and internally, the company basically just pretended that the first article never happened. Rather than acknowledging a single allegation made, management claimed that Polygon released the article near their next game's announcement to generate clicks, which is frankly absurd. But of course, they still warned employees not to talk to the press. Now I know that was a lot, but to summarize, it was pretty miserable to work at TT Games, and things were run by incompetent managers who never listened to employees. It's likely that support for LEGO Worlds got cut short thanks to management carelessly reassigning teams, and this, coupled with the closure of LEGO Dimensions and the dwindling sales from the licensed LEGO games starting in the early 2010s, caused LEGO games as a whole to basically die. The LEGO Skywalker Saga game sold quite well and was the highest performing LEGO game in years, but it was driven primarily by nostalgia for the old games. LEGO Universe, which I briefly mentioned earlier, was the biggest non-TT Games LEGO release, and it managed to get over 2 million users before being shut down in 2012. TT Games is allegedly working on another LEGO video game, but it's said to be stuck in development hell for reasons that we can clearly identify. This project will likely be the final TT Games LEGO game, as general sentiment around these games has declined drastically, and the financials just aren't there anymore. But LEGO video games will likely still live on, albeit in a much different format, with LEGO Fortnite. This partnership was formed between Epic Games and LEGO in 2022, and it's been extremely successful, achieving over 2 million daily players. While TT Games were the pioneers of the LEGO video game as we know it, it has faded into the background due to mismanagement, a failure to innovate, and a general loss of interest in the style of game that they helped to shape. LEGO games, as we, the 90s and 2000s kids, know them, are long gone, and the games as a service model seems to be the future of LEGO video games. This toy brand has done a lot over the last 20 years, and regardless of the countless failures and flops, they've made games that have shaped childhoods for many around the world. Did you play the original LEGO games? Which ones were your favorite? Did you ever play any of the more experimental games like LEGO Dimensions, LEGO Worlds, or LEGO Universe? Let me know your thoughts on this situation in the comments or over on my Discord, which will be linked in the description. Again, if you enjoy these video essays, consider buying me a coffee using the link in the description. I will see you guys next time, and peace.